how we, oops, is that me? Okay. We will share our work and how we impact change in our communities. So first we'll talk about why we developed the Lower Cape Community Housing Partnership. Then we'll dive deeper and talk about the components that make up the program, how we manage all of our work. We will share our successes, our challenges, and what we're looking forward to. And after our presentation, we would like you to think about why you should do this type of work.
All right, so at the CDP, we're focused on building a diverse year-round community of people who can afford to live, work, and thrive in the Lower Cape region. And we do both housing and economic development work, just for your reference. So, of course, the housing crisis isn't unique to the Cape, but the dynamics are a little bit different. So I just want to touch on that a bit. So unlike a lot of places, our real estate market is just totally divorced from our local economy. Half the second homes in the state are on the Cape, and most of those houses are concentrated in our region on the Lower and Outer Cape. So we serve the towns from Provincetown down to Harwich and Brewster. And the seasonal and tourism dynamics, like hyper seasonal and tourism dynamics, drive the market far beyond the reach of a lot of people who live and work here year round. And our tourism-based economy means that most year-rounders, that's what we call them, don't make enough money to afford to rent a home affordably. And even if they can afford, regular market rate rents, they can't find any because we have such a low housing inventory that's being competed for with people who have much higher salaries, off-Cape salaries, that we basically have an effective 0% vacancy rate on our rental market. So when someone posts an apartment on Craigslist, for example, you get hundreds of responses in just a few days. So that's just a little bit of an understanding of what the crisis looks like here. But so why did we develop this program? Well, first of all, the program is called the Lower Cape Community Housing Partnership. And the context for the development of this program, really it's the brainchild of our CEO, Jay Coburn. But in 2017, when the program was created, we were just reeling from an experience with the town of Eastham, which is where our office is. That was pretty unfortunate, but also really illuminating. So in Eastham, like where I live and where our office is, there's a piece of land which is basically in the center of town. We're kind of like a pass-through town that people drive through on the way to Provincetown. We don't have a lot of identity here in Eastham, but you could say that this piece of land is effectively in a village center, which, by the way, we have like 5,000 people that live here year-round. So it's small, but the piece of land is about 10 acres, like 10.4 acres. It used to be a driving range before I moved here 11 years ago. And then Stop and Shop bought it when it was put on the market. They put a non-food business restriction on it, which is a common practice that Stop and Shop does. They buy pieces of land. They put a deed restriction that says you can't have another supermarket there or any kind of food establishment, and then they sell it. So they did that. And it's right on routes. And just so you know, the left border is Route 6. It's like our main highway. And then the yellow line on the right is the bike trail. So that's kind of what's surrounding this piece of land that's called Tea Time. And so in 2016 or so, the CDP decided to get back into the development world by partnering with a developer to purchase and build housing on this parcel that we know as Tea Time. And long story short, the proposal included, like the original proposal included over 100 units of housing, and the town totally freaked out. It had never seen anything like that before, clearly. Everyone hated the design. There was a whole lot of discussion, a lot of animosity. It was dramatic. So went back to the drawing board, cut the design down. I think there were maybe one or two other iterations, but it went down to basically 50 units. And of course, so much time had passed, and the developer had incurred so many expenses that they really didn't have the time to come up with a completely new, very creative design. So they just started putting together in massing units together in larger structures. And so people hated that design even more. And they decided that they actually preferred the original design. But at that point, it had been like, over 6 months or a year or something, and there just wasn't any going back. So that was one piece of it. The other piece was, of course, traffic, right? Traffic is always an issue. And we gauge how, just to give you an idea of how we think about traffic here, we gauge how busy the season is by whether or not we can make a left-hand turn onto Route 6, which is the left border of the parcel. And people were really worried about people making left-hand turns out of that site directly onto a highway. So we did a peer-reviewed traffic study, as one does, and it said that the additional number of trips would be basically negligible. But A ZBA member put a chair on Route 6 by the parcel, held a clicker, and spent the day counting cars on their own and brought their research to a meeting to refute the study. So it just kind of gives you an idea of the climate that we're working in when the ZBA wouldn't pay attention to a peer-reviewed traffic study. And so ultimately the project just collapsed and the town went on to purchase the land. And full disclosure, I'm actually on, because I live in Eastham, I'm on the town committee that's creating a set of recommendations to our local select board about what to do with the site. But just a funny thing is that people were so worried about left-hand turns before, and now one of the recommendations that's being voted on tonight is people are really adamant that the site should be used for a senior center. Just saying. So it became really clear to our CEO at that time, back in 2017, that the town really wasn't prepared to manage a large 40B project. And if that was the case, then that meant that our communities really weren't set up to succeed in building our way out of the housing crisis. So we identified a few barriers. First of all, the region's ability to respond to this crisis is obviously hindered by inadequate land use policies. We encourage sprawl, we discourage multifamily housing. I don't think there's any multifamily housing by right allowed in our region. And land use policies have to change in order to address the affordable housing crisis. So that's a known. And then the other thing is that volunteer town boards are made up of people with really good intentions, but really minimal expertise in the complexity of developing and managing affordable housing, which is a real struggle to address the lack of housing. And then finance and land use policies are determined by town meeting. We have annual town meeting here. And it just creates a really challenging regulatory environment in which to develop affordable housing and market rate housing when there's so much opposition for it at that decision-making level. And it also means that decisions are made by a handful of people, a couple hundred versus thousands, who have the time and energy to show up at town meetings and vote on local decisions. There's that BU study about who shows up to planning board meetings, for example. In most cases, they're not the same people who are working the long hours in the summer to save up enough money to make it through the off season and who would actually benefit from the housing. And then finally, NIMBY sentiments, lack of public support, major barrier to housing production here on the Cape and everywhere really, as well as the misinformation that goes along with that. So the solution that we came up with is a Lower Cape Community Housing Partnership. It's using traditional community organizing and leadership development strategies, along with education, workshops and trainings, to increase the capacity of towns to meet the housing needs of our residents. And we're doing that in three main ways. I call them three buckets. Each bucket has a different audience. So the first bucket is what we call the Lower Cape Housing Institute. The audience for the Housing Institute, well, by the way, this is completely modeled after MHP's Annual Housing Institute, but we noticed that people in our region just weren't going, like nobody crosses the bridge, right? So we kind of we picked and chose what topics were most relevant to our region, and we brought that expertise to the Cape, a lot of times using the same speakers. I'll say right off the top, a big piece of our program is copying, stealing, adapting as much as we possibly can and kind of making it relevant to our region. So I'm not afraid to say that. That is why we're successful. So the Housing Institute is specifically for elected and appointed municipal officials and town staff. We hold a series of workshops and peer meetings. We'll talk about that more in detail, that equip town officials with the knowledge, resources, and skills they need to help their towns create more housing opportunities for people at all income levels. And the Housing Institute is measured against three main outcomes. One is we want to see towns implement changes in zoning that support housing development. The second thing is we want to see an increase in the number of affordable units on each town's subsidized housing inventory. And the third is we want to see towns increase utilization of their Community Preservation Act funding for affordable housing. And over the years, we've really expanded that to say we just want to see towns increase funding for housing, period. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket is what we call the Lower Cape Housing Advocacy Program. And the audience for the Housing Advocacy Program is kind of everybody else. So it's decision makers, but at the citizen level. So voters, people who show up to meetings, community leaders, business leaders, low to moderate income residents, non-municipal officials. And we work with them to develop their leadership skills or organizing skills or public speaking skills. We really want them to engage in public hearings and town meetings. We say we want them to show up and speak up at town meetings. whether it's annual town meeting or, you know, boards and committee meetings with like a lowercase t for town. And this piece has really evolved the most since the first conception of the project. We started off with offering advocacy trainings, and then we moved on to kind of coordinating groups of people, and we're slowly moving toward actual community organizing model. And our outcomes for housing advocacy are to develop a network of advocates that can be mobilized to support housing initiatives, to identify housing leaders and support them in their leadership development, and to have advocates build relationships with each other and, you know, the ability to support each other. And then the third piece is a public education campaign. So we actually adapted an existing media campaign developed by Martha's Vineyard Island Housing Trust. I think it's called the Workforce Housing Partnership. And so what we tried to do is we chose some people to profile, and we really wanted to show the true face of people who live in or need housing. And there are some outcomes associated with that as well, but I will admit that this is definitely the piece of the program that is the hardest to evaluate. So I'm going to turn it over to Pelinda to go a little deeper into the pieces of the program.
Oops. Here we go. Great, thanks, Andrea. So now let's take a closer look at the Lower Cape Community Housing Partnership Institute. And so the Institute is a year-long educational program for elected and appointed municipal officials and town staff who can choose to participate in workshops and peer group meetings a la carte. So we cover different topics that change every year through a constant feedback loop with our town captains, which I'll say a little more about later. The Institute is what we put a lot of energy to. Our goal is to support town government in making bolder and more strategic decisions about land, funding, zoning, in order to create much needed homes so we can have a more viable year-round community. So we started out with facilitating a 6-week series of workshops with experts and local venues. We have some printed materials that I'm sharing here on my screen. We have our curriculum flyer, our brochure. And so the following year, we noticed that it was the same people coming to our workshops. So we wanted to figure out a way to diversify participants by being more inclusive to non-housing boards and committees. And when the pandemic happened, we made all of our workshops virtual, which made them more accessible and well attended. So these are, this is a slide of our peer group meetings, and this is a sample of our flyer for our 2021 spring peer group meeting. These are sub-regional peer group meetings in the Lower and Outer Cape. They are informal conversations, and they provide a unique opportunity for towns to learn from each other, build relationships, discuss opportunities for regional collaboration. Before the peer group meetings, towns who were geographically right next to each other were barely working together, even though they had the same challenges and were working on the same projects. In year 3, we added town wrap-up for graduates of the Lower Cape Community Housing Partnership. So these wrap-ups are professionally facilitated, conversations for each town. And the one thing I'll note about this is that important thing about peer group meetings, as well as wrap-ups, is that these meetings help towns build alignment across boards and committees, foster relationship building. And one of the goals that materialized along the way was the desire to support regional collaboration and sharing of resources as much as possible. And some proof of this is the fact that towns have provided funding for housing in neighboring towns. And we are now having discussions about how to formalize this practice by planning regional projects. We also have our housing contracts, and these are the towns that have had most successes. The towns that have had the most successes are the towns that have had people whose job it is to advance housing initiatives. So historically, there has not been enough housing work to warrant hiring a staff person. So this is where we come in to offer these services under a contractual basis. Some of the work that we provide include office hours. This includes referrals for residents to housing providers and homeless prevention services. We provide support to town housing related committees as directed by town administration. We also monitor existing units on town's subsidized housing inventory. In all of this, town captains have been a major part of our success. Since we work in all of the 8 towns, it's very challenging to know what's going on in each town. They are usually town staff, but could be on a town board or committee. We maintain a strong relationship with one person in each town who designate as a town captain, and they agree to take this on. We have a whole description of what the role entails. But basically, they keep us posted on housing related news in their town. They work with us to design their town's wrap up and decide who should be included. They also tell us what they are working on and help us choose workshop topics that will advance their work. They give us feedback on programming, so they help us out a lot. So as you can see, there's a lot going on in each town, and there's a lot of housing issues. So to keep everyone up to date and informed, we send out a monthly Lower Cape Housing Institute newsletter. We use Constant Contact, and we currently have over 500 subscribers. We use sort of the same format. We list events, we list town updates for all 8 towns. We provide housing resources and housing news.
All right, thank you. I will say that every single month when Belinda sends out the e-newsletter, which she takes full credit for, I hope, we always get a lot of praise. It's just like the easiest way for people to stay on top of what's going on in the region, and it's the only sort of clearinghouse of housing initiatives that that's out there. So let's talk a little bit more about the advocacy program. So as I said at the top, the advocacy program helps residents, business leaders, and community members to advance their own housing needs. We started with a training that covered public speaking, how to craft a message, the anatomy of a town meeting. A major barrier that we heard from a lot of people was just like, they want to advocate, but they don't know how. And also they're scared. Like they don't want, something I heard over and over was, I just don't know what to say and I don't want to sound dumb. You know, I really need a lot of help when I come into the room. I don't know where to sit. How do I know when to come to the podium? Like I'm just not familiar with this environment. So we could break it down and help them understand. So before they walk in the room, they know what to expect. And we really want them to feel empowered to speak up and show up. So once we started getting some groups of people organized, we started being able to direct them to housing initiatives, decisions, projects that they could react to as they came up. And we started building more relationships. We could sort of start identifying community leaders and work with them to build out these small cohorts that could, in theory, be mobilized, although it's not really that easy. We realized early on that it would be really hard to build out and support these cohorts without more staff. So we sought partners who could help us fill those gaps. And we recruited housing champions. So housing champions are basically our advocacy version of town captains. So we have a strong relationship with someone in town hall in each town, which is our town captain. And then we're working on developing a strong relationship with a community leader or a featured community leader that we can nurture in the community that's called a housing champion. So they are not an elected official. And back in January of 2020, we got our housing champions together to form a design group. And the goal at that point was that we were going to work with this design group to help launch coalition building efforts in all of the towns. And then the pandemic hit. So, you know, I think if you can all remember, there was a lot of uncertainty in the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, I guess there still is. And people just really lost steam, and it didn't feel like as important. And we wanted to respect that people just kind of needed the space to grieve, to deal with the transition. And we had to get a little creative about how to advance our housing advocacy program without sticking to our original vision of doing coalition building on our own with this group of housing champions. We still keep in touch with them, but what we decided to do was we reached out to CHAPA, Citizens Housing and Planning Association. They have a program called the Municipal Engagement Initiative that does coalition building that's kind of based in the vision that's developed by the town. So it starts off with a leadership core team that includes a municipal official and 1 or 2 other community members. And you have to apply for that program. A couple towns in our region have applied but haven't gotten in. And so we partner with CHAPA to see hey, is there a way that we can bring that program to the region without towns having to go to this formal application process? And they said, yes, they have a light, L-I-T-E version of their program. Belinda, I don't know if you have the link to the toolkit handy, but we can send that to folks if you're interested. And we talked to our town captains. We said, look, we have this awesome opportunity working with CHAPA. You don't have to apply. We'll get this ongoing support from CHAPA to launch a coalition in your community. Who's interested? And half the towns in our region raised their hand and said, pick me. So we started working with Orleans, Brewster, Chatham, and Truro. And it's very slow going work, I will say that. But what's interesting is that from the very beginning, there was definitely a shared goal around developing coalitions in each town, but feeding up to a future regional housing coalition. So the groups meet independently, and then every quarter or so, we get together and meet as a region to share successes, challenges, et cetera, et cetera. And the goal is that in doing that, we're laying the foundation so that in a few years, when we have 4 awesome or 8 awesome housing coalitions going in each town, that they can start thinking of themselves as more of a regional entity, and of course the collective power that implies. Is there anything else that I have to say about advocacy, Belinda? I think that's the broad strokes.
Yeah.
Oh, the media campaign. I mentioned it before, but this is just to show you, we started in 2019, profiling some individuals who live in or need housing. And you can find these on our website. And then in 2020, we did a phase 2, and we're thinking about how to change our message for the future. But every year and a half or so, we're trying to refresh that campaign. And we also let towns use it when they're talking about their own need and crisis. On to, is it managing capacity?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things we hear a lot when we talk about our program is, how many people do you have working on this? And the answer is, it's Belinda and I. We also get a lot of support from other members of our staff, but largely it's Belinda and I. And so the only way that we're able to do all of this is by working with as many people as I possibly can, and being really picky. From the very beginning, I remember when we sat down at a table and developed the first curriculum for the Lower Cape Housing Institute, we worked with MHP, with Massachusetts Housing Partnership, with CHAPA, and with our regional planning agency, the Cape Cod Commission. So we're constantly talking to people about what they need, what's working, what's not working, what's the new thing, what is a pain point that's coming up in all of the towns that we can address. Because we've been developing these relationships with municipal officials over the past 4 or 5 years now, we get to have, a lot of these private conversations where people say we're really struggling with X, but they'll never admit to that out loud in a public meeting. But we know, okay, so 8 or 7, 6 towns are all having a hard time with X. Let's address it, and let's let everybody know that everyone is having the same problem, and so we can just talk about it instead of letting it be the elephant in the room. So we team up with we leverage relationships as much as we can to be efficient. Like I said, we work with CHAPA to fill a gap that we just don't have the capacity to handle on our own. We lean heavily on our town captains and our housing champions. We position ourselves to be known as being highly collaborative. So people reach out to us when they have ideas. We just maintain this constant feedback loop where we're always asking for feedback and implementing it at the same time. Oh, and prioritizing. There's always something that's falling to the bottom of the list, but that's just how it goes. All right, what's next? Oh, and just so people have a sense of how we work together, we rely heavily on technology to keep ourselves organized, try and keep our materials branded so the program looks nice and shiny and special from the outside, and people should want to be a part of it. All right, I talked a little bit about our desired outcomes. Some successes that we've seen. Well, one of the things I want to say is that we do have some tools that we use to evaluate the program against our outcomes. I think the main tool we use is what we call an annual town meeting housing summary. So every year, each town has an annual town meeting where important policy decisions get made, particularly around zoning and funding allocation. And Pelinda will search through, you know, tons and tons of articles on the town's warrants, figure out the ones that are related to housing. So for example, it could say housing in it, or it could have something to do with wastewater or zoning, right? So something that's going to have a potential to impact housing. And we identify those as housing related articles. We put them into a document that we call Annual Town Meeting Housing Summary. And by putting them together in this way, A, we create a one-stop shopping for anyone who wants to know about what's going on around housing in the region, because we do share it with our participants and put it in our newsletter. And B, it helps us easily count how many housing articles and kind of categorize them as far as like how many zoning articles, how many land acquisitions, how many dollars are being allocated for housing. So that's a really important way that we can see year to year what's changing and what's improving and whether or not we're being effective. But just as an example, over the past few years, we've seen a lot of towns change their accessory dwelling unit bylaws to make them easier to use. We've seen towns adopt the municipal affordable housing trust model, which makes them a lot more effective. We've seen towns add housing staff, increasing their funding for housing, not just affordable housing, but various income levels. And then I think the thing that I'm most excited about is that, well, last year, the thing we were most excited about was that for the first time, every single town in our region was working on a major project, like something, you know, 30 to 40 units, which is a huge project in our region. And there was a piece of land in play in every town, which had never happened before. And while we don't take full credit, it just happens to be a miracle that's occurred while we've been working on this. But I think what's the cool thing right now is that that's still true. The towns are still working on developments, but also in the past year and a half, we've seen 4 major land acquisitions in the region. One of them is 70 acres. Another one that just got approved at a recent town meeting is 100 acres. And all of these are including housing components. And there's definitely a sense that, you know, 5 years ago, this would not have happened, that, you know, there would be these amazing opportunities and people would be talking about using them for housing. But of course, there are still challenges. So some things that we've noticed, well, first of all, there's still a lot of work to do, that's for sure. NIMBYism is still strong and our housing stock continues to decrease. The housing contract work, I think we originally envisioned that by being a part of the day-to-day work, we would be able to have a bigger impact in some towns. But it turns out that when you are contracted by the town, you have to do what the town says, and it's not always something that we agree with. So we find that the housing contracts have kind of tied our hands a bit. Another constraint is just, like I said, it's Pelinda and I. And so working with a small team, it can be really easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day logistics and not have time to kind of zoom out to the broader policy goals, but we're getting there and we're excited about a couple things that are coming next. So the biggest thing that we're excited about is that we are increasing our own capacity to do this work by hiring a community organizer, which is just like the most exciting thing ever. So the community organizer is going to be focusing on coalition building in all the towns. We're also getting back into the housing development space. And so the organizer is going to be working on community engagement for those developments when that arises. There's a project in Wellfleet near us that is looking pretty promising. And so they'll probably work on that. And then the organizer is going to help us build more relationships and be more connected with our community, increase our connections with residents, and help us be more grounded in the community that we serve. The other thing that we're looking forward to is we are starting to zoom out and have some more policy-oriented goals. So this current fiscal year that we are in right now, we have a goal of trying to get all of our towns to increase their short-term rental tax allocation for housing. We want to see towns allocate 100% of their short-term rental tax to housing. Some towns are closer than others, and some towns are going to be quite an uphill battle. And so we're developing strategies about which towns we can get this done from the inside and which towns might need to be influenced from the outside. And then we're hoping to have a zoning goal next year. And then another cool thing that's on the horizon is that we have a strategic partnership with another nonprofit in the area called Homeless Prevention Council. And we jointly applied for ARPA funding to put together an ADU resource center to see if we can get a lot more housing created in the short term by offering technical support to property owners. So a couple takeaways about why we think you should think about doing similar work. First of all, it seems like working with decision makers on both sides of the equation, right? Elected officials and voters seems to move the needle in a relatively short period of time. A lot of our evaluations show that people are surprised by how much the discourse around housing in the region has shifted since the Lower Cape Community Housing Partnership began. And the advocacy component of the program really helps us as a CDC be more closely aligned with the values of the community development field, especially and including investing in relationships that help us develop ongoing feedback loops. So by constantly evaluating our programming based on what we hear on the ground, we can make sure that we're working inclusively on products that are of and for our communities. And frankly, our success has helped us be seen as even a more credible source of information, and people really take our advice as strategic guidance. And also, we've enjoyed more visibility because of that. We get asked to speak at these kinds of events. A lot of organizations have asked us if they can adopt our model. So not only are we having a real impact in our communities, but the program has strengthened the organization overall. And I hope that these organizations, and maybe some of you who pick and choose pieces of this that might be useful to your work, that you let us know, that you ask us questions, because we love to share all of our resources so that you don't have to come up with your own. And I hope that enough groups that start taking this kind of model on will talk to each other and we can share learnings amongst ourselves one day. That's all I got.
That's it. And here's our contact.
Thanks, Belinda and Andrea. That was awesome. I hope every time I hear about this program, I'm more and more impressed. And now, before we take any Q&A from you, we're going to hear from Sarah Burns from the Mel King Institute, who's going to talk about the resident leadership part of this work and how she can add to your capacity to do that work. Sarah?
Great. Thank you, Pam. Okay, are folks seeing my screen? Yes, good. So hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Burns from the Mel King Institute. I am the director of what we're now calling the Resident Leadership Academy, which is an expansion of the work that we've been doing with public housing tenants for about 5 years now. So what the RLA does is we work with grassroots leaders to build their power and voice, and we do that by offering trainings and networking opportunities for residents to build skills and knowledge so they may effectively participate in the decision-making that impacts their lives and communities. And hopefully that sounds familiar, because I think broadly this is what Andrea and Belinda were talking about, particularly in their work engaging voters in the community. So the idea is that we wanted to talk about the RLA today so that folks can think about collaborating with us as we are working with CDCs to engage communities. So there we go. So as I said, this work is built on the public housing training program, which is sort of a different program at the Mel King Institute, where we've trained over 400 residents from 106 housing authorities. And through that work, we've learned, some different things about working with tenants and working with resident leaders. And so now we're going to be expanding and working with CDC residents, and that can mean people in your community, or it could mean people in your buildings. And we're also open to working with groups who are not CDCs. So we're pretty flexible on how we're going to be moving forward. And so I just wanted to share a few things from what we've learned in our trainings. And I think we heard this from the CDP presentation as well, that people can be held back from voicing their opinions. There's probably a lot of people in your community who do support affordable housing and other parts of your agenda, but people can be afraid, right? Or they could be have maybe a sense of, oh, what's the point? I'm not going to bother speaking out, because there's this sort of sense of hopelessness that things can never change. People can be divided against each other, and there can be mass confusion too about, there could be misinformation. And so that can be holding people back from supporting affordable housing. So just want to mention that it's these intangible things that we need to be thinking about as we're out in the community, as well as just the sort of more normal stuff that we might be thinking about. And this is a really big deal when we work with the public housing residents, of course, too. And what we try to help folks focus on as they work in their communities is not so much thinking about the hostile people, because everybody gets kind of the sort of tensions that arise when we have NIMBY people show up and stuff like that. That can be extremely energy draining, right? But the vast majority of your community is probably in this disengaged ring, right? So what we try to train folks to think about as they're working in their community is just moving whoever you can engage closer into the center of your core, the core of your community that you're working with. Turning activists into core team members, supporters into activists, and finding disengaged folks and bringing them into the supporter ring, and just saying a nice prayer for the hostile folks is what we say. So moving, not letting that drain away all your attention, even though there can be really loud voices in a community that might be opposing you. When we use the popular education approach, these are just sort of basics. Most folks know this when you're out in the community. You have to obviously know what people's lives are really like, what they care about. And this is where you're going to come up against, well, we have a CDC agenda, and then we're out in the community and discovering that people care about a whole huge range of other things too, right? So how do we sort of navigate those dynamics? And one way to do that is actually by offering explanations about root causes. And this is the political education piece around, something that's broken in my life might be because of some distant decision maker making some kind of decision that is very difficult to understand. So part of our training is always about helping folks understand the root causes of their lives. And then the big thing, and this is what the CDP folks have done so brilliantly, is they've designed and offered a structure for participation that makes sense for real people. So this is what the RLA can help folks think through as well. Sorry, there's all this stuff up here, but so just to say specifically the CDC training collaborative that we can offer you, we will collaborate with you or with the CDC or other group to train residents in your community or in your properties. We'll collaborate on the goals, the curriculum, and the outcomes of that training. We go through 3 phases. The first phase is an assessment where we just talk to you about who you want to train and why and what you hope to see come out of it. And we'll start to think about coming out of it, what are the structures by which they will be able to voice their opinion and be engaged in the community. So once we've had some conversations, then we'll actually do some training. And then we'll come back and try to integrate the learnings with the CDC so that folks can take advantage of action opportunities. And then this is just a list of some of the topics that we can train on. Some of this comes from our public housing curriculum. Others are sort of milking standards such as group facilitation and negotiation. So once we know more about what folks in your community need to learn, we can put together the curriculum that makes sense. And then lastly, if you are interested, just give me a call or shoot me an email, and that is how we can begin the conversation about helping folks in your community build their power and voice, and hopefully join you in supporting affordable housing. So that is what I've got. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. And you all should take a look in the chat because I just put the link to the Resident Leadership Academy in the chat. Pelinda put the CHAPA Municipal Engagement Light Toolkit, and I put the link for the CHAPA Municipal Engagement Initiative in the chat. So there's lots of good info in the chat about what folks just talked about. So I know there was a lot of information and it's probably all sinking in, but if folks have questions, the best thing to do is if you have a question, put it in the chat, because you can raise your hand and I'll try and catch you. I can't see everybody all at the same time, but I do have the chat open. So any questions for any of our 3 presenters? None? Okay, well then you're just going to have to talk to each other. We're going to go into a small group and we're going to use a Jamboard. I don't know if folks have ever used a Jamboard, but it's a way for you to share your responses. If you here, I will put the link to the Jamboard in the chat. And you can open that. If you just click on that link, that will take you to the Jamboard. Now, the trick is you need to, when you get assigned to a breakout room, please just look and see which breakout room you're in, 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5, and then use the Jamboard that that coincides with your breakout room. I've tried to put one of us in each of the small groups to help us. We'll have somebody from MACDC there to help you access the Jamboard. And we're going to talk about a question. What is your organization currently doing to engage the community, residents, and municipal officials? So let's just talk a little bit about what are you doing now to do that, okay? So, and we're going to take about 6 or 7 minutes to have this conversation, okay? Great. Hi, guys. I think you might have all joined after I created the breakout rooms. So we'll just be our own breakout room. How's that?
That's fine.
And if do folks want to introduce themselves? You know who I am, right? Pam Bender, MACDC.
I'm Lisa Braxton, Communications Coordinator with MHP. I'm just on as a fly on the wall, just to listen to what people are doing, what the organizations are doing to connect with their constituents.
Thanks for coming. I hope you heard the nice shout out that Andrea gave to the MHP Housing Institute. Katie.
No, I missed that.
Katie, where are you from?
I'm also from MHP. I'm with the community assistance team at MHP.
Nice to meet you.
Hi
Brianna.
everyone, I'm Brianna. I'm from Watch CDC. I'm a campaign communications coordinator.
And tell us where Watch is.
Waltham, Massachusetts.
And one of my favorite CDCs. Don't tell.
I won't, it'll be between us.
John.
John Seward, Massachusetts Association of Housing Cooperatives and the TOPA Coalition.
Yeah, John and I see each other all the time in the TOPA Coalition. So you know what, I'm going to share my screen now so that you all can see the Jamboard. I don't know, did any of you were able to access it?
I was able to, I just
Cool.
didn't know if I was supposed to open this up.
Yeah, sure. So here's the Jamboard. Can folks see this? So what you can, I mean, I can do it if you want. Here's a sticky note. I can just type stuff on and we can stick it on the Jamboard. What are folks currently doing to engage the community and residents, municipal officials, et cetera? It's similar to what CDP is doing.
I guess I can start. So at Watch right now, we're trying to convert an abandoned armory into 23 affordable housing units. So we went through the whole, municipal process, trying to get it approved. But we've really been engaging our community members. So we've created a tag, it's a tenants action group, and we've had them protest or, give their opinions of what they want and why they want this to be converted into affordable housing. We've created petitions. We've had, I think on this petition, we've had over 2,000 people sign. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at it in a while, but yeah, we're just trying to get creative and trying to bring people in and get the community's approval, basically.
That's awesome. Now, you said 2,000 people signed. What did they sign?
A petition that we have. I believe it's 2,000. I'm not sure. I haven't checked the numbers in a while.
And you delivered that petition to whom?
We're calling out Mayor McCarthy, and we've presented that this is something that the community wants and needs.
Great. I love that, a tenants action group. Anyone else?
I'm curious, who are the tenants? Who are they tenants of what? Of other developments you guys have or?
No, they're Waltham community. They're Waltham tenants, you know, just,
Residents?
yeah, just residents of
Cool.
Massachusetts. Yeah.
Cool.
You know what? I just realized I think I'm on the wrong Jamboard. I just immediately went, I'm gonna go to one that nobody else is on and do the same thing. I'm curious, Brianna, besides, you said something about a protest. So besides signing the petition, what else has this tag group done?
I wouldn't say it's a protest, but we printed out a huge banner. We had a bunch of members of the tag group come and they made their own posters as of why they are asking for this to pass. Took a bunch of pictures, and we kind of used that as like to engage more community members in this thing that we're trying to pass.
That's great.
So when did this action happen, and has there been an outcome yet?
So this happened, I mean, we try to engage the tag members as much as possible. We have meetings and stuff where we invite them and, you know, we let them give their opinions and express their support for this. This specific thing, like the protest, this happened last year, right in the middle of the pandemic. It was a little tricky because, you know, we were trying to social distance and all that stuff. So we didn't do a lot of in-person movement, but everything's kind of been virtual. Since then, it's been put on a pause, I believe. The mayor's asking for some paperwork. There's a bit of a confusion with the application. So it's kind of like in the air right now, but we continue to, you know, try to press for it to happen.
That's great. That's great. Have you engaged with any of do you have city council in Waltham?
Yes, as we had our city council and another group, slipping my mind right now. But yeah, we've worked with the city councilors who are who want this to happen, who are, you know, are on our side. We've tried to talk to the ones who are kind of hesitant about it, try to, you know, convince them as to why it's important for the community. Right now, Waltham has a 5+ year wait to get into affordable housing. So, you know, it's something that the community really needs and really wants, because the AMI just doesn't match rent income. You know, it's a very difficult situation for a lot of residents in Waltham. So try to make it as easy as possible, help, you know.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You know, I do a lot of work with Genoveva, so
Oh yeah, she's on this meeting.
yeah, I know. I hear a lot about the great work she does with tenants in Waltham.
Yeah, she's great.
I know that Waltham's a tough place for affordable housing.
It sure is.
I think we're going to have the breakout groups come back now, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But thank you, Brianna. Thank you.
You're welcome, of course.
I can only figure out how to do this. Here come people. I need to figure out how to stop sharing my screen.
So Pam, were there multiple Jamboards? Because we only saw the one you have up there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There were multiple Jamboards. Oops. Can you guys, okay, I did stop sharing. Okay, yes, there were multiple Jamboards. There were, and I see like lots of people found their Jamboard. So I hope you guys all got the opportunity to have some good conversations. Did anybody hear anything that really surprised them? Did you learn about some ways of engaging folks that really was surprising or new to you? anything that any good ideas? You heard any good ideas that you hadn't thought of before? So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to take a look at these just so that people can see what other people said. Here we go. Can people see this? Yes, yes. So I'm not sure what MAHC is.
That's Massachusetts Association of Housing Cooperatives, your partner in the TOPA Coalition, Pam.
Okay. So you had an annual meeting for your members this summer, and you that's how you engaged residents? Folks came together at a meeting?
Yes, we had a very wide-ranging discussion amongst our members at the close of the meeting that's going to be very helpful for our upcoming strategic planning sessions by the board.
Great, great.
And what's cut off is our summer co-op cookout.
It did get cut off a little bit. You had a cookout.
We had a cookout this summer, actual people next to other people in concert with the Greater Boston Chamber of Co-ops. And mayoral candidate Michelle Wu came to it, and that turned out pretty well.
Great. You managed to cover two bases at the same time: residents, community members, and elected officials. Here's other folks. Career fairs, engaging members by bringing them together with career fairs, building captains, community events in person. There's a common thread. I know that the pandemic has really challenged us in engaging folks. And I think we'll be able to do a little bit more in person now. Leadership teams in buildings, building captains, workshops to develop leadership. Holding seminars with young adults. Financial products for community members. Toolkits, meeting people where they're at. You know, working with residents to fill out the census. So when you're providing folks with things they need, like COVID testing, vaccines, census, it's a great way to engage them and start to engage them around advocacy work and other things. Let's see, I think we have one more. We heard from Watch. They created a tenants action group to advocate for affordable housing and created a petition for them to sign. Okay. So now that we've heard, oh, Lisa, did you have a question?
Yes, is there a way that we can get a copy of those Post-its?
Yes, yes, I will make sure that you will have the link, and then you can access these at any time.
Okay, great.
Thanks for asking. But let's talk some more. So we're gonna do another small group discussion. Let's see, there's now 20 of us.
Pam, I think you had a question. I think Crystal wanted to say
Okay.
something.
Thanks, Don. Hi, Crystal. Did you have a question? No? Any questions? Any more questions? Okay, well, what we're gonna do now is you're gonna go back to some small groups, and again, we're gonna have a different Jamboard now, because we're gonna talk about two different questions. How could this work benefit what you're currently doing? And what are the barriers? What's keeping you from doing this work or doing more of it? And I'm going to give you another Okay, I think Sarah just gave us the new link to the new Jamboard. So here we go. And again, whoops, if you can remember what room you're in and try and use the Jamboard. Don't be like me. Use the Jamboard that coincides with your room number. Okay. Did that work?
I didn't get a request.
Oh, no, that didn't work. Sorry, guys. Here we go. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time here.
Pam, do you want to just do it in the full group? We're not that big.
Yeah, I think I'm sorry to say I'm having a hard time creating these Baker group for some reason, but yeah, there's 20 of us, and I can just share my screen, and we can take a look at the Jamboard, and folks can so can folks see this Jamboard?
Yep.
And so how would doing this kind of work, engaging voters, municipal officials, other community residents, how would this benefit the work you're doing, and or what keeps you from what barriers do you face? So somebody said, we often feel like we're preaching to the choir. I'm wondering if any of our presenters have a response to what do you do if you feel like you're preaching to the choir?
Well, I think a big piece of the coalition building work is to try to not preach to the choir by pulling in the unusual suspects. And that requires thinking really intentionally about who already comes to everything and who's missing from the conversation, and pulling in those people who are missing.
I think it's I've heard somewhere that the choir also does need preaching to. So just it's not necessarily bad to keep shoring up your core folks, but yeah, just identifying people slightly less connected and building a relationship with them before you necessarily ask them to do something, right? So it's all about those relationships.
Yeah, and one thing that I think I've found to be a lot more successful, and I guess, you know, building that might be good, is also just, there are some people that are not meant to be leaders, and they don't really want to, you know, resident leadership and things like that. And so it's more about just exposing, you know, people to information that they could potentially then become interested in and then learn and grow more, but not necessarily using it always for an advantage, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. You're right. Not everyone's ready to be a leader.
Yeah.
For me, it's important to do this work because at the different stages, people will react accordingly. Like, for example, people are afraid to talk about affordable housing. If they are politicians, because they are new politicians and they don't know exactly what to say, or so for me to help them understand what is our reality will gain power for themselves to continue supporting us or keeping aside. Then with the community at the various stages too, some people don't even understand that they can do something. They feel that that's the way it has to be and there's no other way. They don't understand that their voices count. So it's very important for the community to let them know that each voice counts and counts in a very powerful way. And to keep educating them about what is going on with the law, with programs, and how they can get involved is very powerful, because the people that you less think that they are going to be your allies and that they are going to be behind the cause are the first ones raising their hands and moving forward.
Thank you, Genoveva. You know, this keeps coming up, this whole issue of fear. Folks are afraid to speak up. And the interesting thing, like Genoveva, even the elected officials can be fearful, right?
Yeah, more often than what you think. Yes, because it's well, like in my town, when I started 6-7 years ago, affordable housing was not a conversation. And for us to get into affordable housing conversations with city officials was like, okay, they will invite us out of meetings. That's how like so close it was. Now everybody wants to talk about affordable housing, everybody. So it's good, it's a good time, because it's a good time to educate them and to let them know that this is an important conversation to have if they want to continue to have a vibrant and safe community.
I think you just said the key thing about having conversations outside of meetings, and that, you know, you don't have to, everything doesn't have to be a meeting. That it's more about building relationships and building trusting relationships so that people can learn from each other and support each other.
Yeah, I'm not afraid even to send one word, like I said to my group. I just congratulate all the new city officials, and then 2-3 days later, I say coffee. That's it, and they respond. And so I have my dates, and we have a conversation going. That's for me is much simpler. It's less scared. They are not seeing someone that is going to always be behind them, asking them for a vote or a signature. They see a person that they can work with.
That is key, Genoveva. That is key.
Pam?
Yes.
I just wanted to add to your point about elected officials also are afraid to speak up. I think one of the things that we saw in, you know, getting people to come to our peer group meetings is that these elected officials got to see other people talking about things and got the sense that like they weren't the only housing advocates in their town. And a lot of the feedback that we heard is that even though people, elected officials specifically, were already on board with the need for affordable housing and advocating for it, they felt much more confident in making bolder statements in public meetings, for example. And one of the pieces that I didn't mention for the Housing Institute is that we noticed that even if people are really passionate about affordable housing and they want to, you know, affect good change, they have a really hard time talking about it. And messaging is like any other resource that we can bring to the table. So another thing that we've done in our peer group meetings is that this year we've partnered with CHAPA, and Dana Lewinter from the MEI program is coming to our peer group meetings to offer some key talking points and strategies around how to talk about the topics that we're covering in that meeting.
Great, great. Yeah, so I'm glad that you you mentioned that. I'm gonna put a couple of links in the chat for other resources, because, you know, I think you talked a little bit about capacity, and we all know that it takes a lot of time and effort to build these kind of relationships and to educate people and get people clear about messaging. But there are, and you know, we all can't do everything, but there are some resources out there. And one of them is Abundant Housing Massachusetts. I know, Andrea, actually, you're on the board of Abundant Housing, right? But
Yes.
they're and I'm going to put the link to their website in the chat. They're a good place. Do you want to say anything about Abundant Housing? Andrea, you probably know more than I do.
Let's see. I will say that Abundant Housing is different from other advocacy groups because it's really grassroots oriented, and it's a group that is based on the idea of making really bold statements and not being afraid to say the controversial thing. We just hired a statewide organizer who I'm really, really excited about. So hopefully a lot of your communities will be hearing from Cassie. And the resource there is that Abundant Housing is really looking to support communities in building coalitions from the ground up. And so they're a source of technical assistance for that.
Right. And they have some interesting like webinars coming up. I just saw on their website. So that if, you know, you might not have a community organizer on staff or a staff that can really, you know, engage people, but you can start steering some of your residents who are interested to some of these webinars and these other organizations like Abundant Housing. And there's also another one that MACDC is a member of. It's the Great Neighborhoods Network. And the Great Neighborhoods Network was originally started by the Smart Growth Alliance, and it's now housed at Livable Streets. And I just put the link to their website into the chat. But they're very eager. There's a number of groups in the network, and they're very eager to engage community people around issues of affordable housing and transportation and climate change, because the three do intersect completely. And they're willing to provide technical assistance for how folks can get more active and get engaged in local campaigns or local struggles around, you know, building more affordable housing, getting better transportation, or fighting climate change. I think those are both really helpful resources for folks. Did anyone else have any questions for anyone or anything they wanted to add to this conversation? I just wanted to say one of the reasons MACDC wanted to share all of the incredible work that Andrea and Pelinda are doing and that Sarah's doing with the Resident Leadership Academy is that when organizations are thinking big picture about how do we build a stronger base in all of our communities for affordable housing, it just makes the work that much easier. We know so many CDCs to sort of focus on their development and let me get the zoning variances and the permits for this one development. But when you think bigger picture about a strong base of advocates for affordable housing to change zoning or to strengthen the whole idea, like Genevieve says, suddenly now everybody wants to talk affordable housing. It makes your work to develop affordable housing that much easier. You don't have to just reinvent the wheel for every development. And it you know, you're really looking at the long-term solutions instead of sort of one-offs. So we're hoping that all of you will think about how you can engage the larger community in this important advocacy work. With that, I'm going to thank you all for coming. Thank you for sharing your ideas. And I want to offer our three presenters a nice round of applause for the great job they did. I will make sure that you all get the link so that you can access the Jamboards and the recording. So, and I hope to see many of you either in person at Holy Cross at MACDC's annual meeting on Thursday or online, because we're doing both. You can watch the annual meeting virtually or you can come in person. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Pam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
Everybody, thank you.